Are special effects in movies getting worse? Was CGI better in the 90s? These are questions I hear all the time, and it's actually something I think about a lot, probably more than I should. And the honest answer is sometimes. Jason Emma here, and this is the Movie Mix Deep Dive. All right, so to take on a topic such as this, we could go way back into the early days of Hollywood effects, but I prefer to stick with what I know, and so our focus will begin in the 90s when CGI really first began to find its way into mainstream cinema. Now, before you complain, yes, I know, 1985 we had young Sherlock Holmes, and that gave us our first fully CGI character. That was the Stained Glass Knight. It was crude, but for the time it was also kind of wonderful. The Last Starfighter, Looker, The Abyss, and of course Tron, one of cinema's most impressive features in my opinion, all featured some kind of CGI. But aside from The Abyss, and I suppose The Last Starfighter a little bit, it isn't exactly the kind of CGI we're talking about. Everything CG and Looker takes place on a computer. And of course Tron CG is in a computer. So they don't need to convince us that this is real world we're looking at. The CG used in The Last Starfighter, while ambitious for the time, doesn't really hold up on the technical level, but I still sort of love it for the nostalgia factor. In 1991, James Cameron took what he had learned from the water tentacles and The Abyss, which barely scraped into the 80s, that one was 1989, and pushed it even further to give us liquid metal. This was in Terminator 2, of course. Now, what Cameron did in both films, Terminator 2 and The Abyss, was to use that CG to enhance, overall practical shots. And it was great. But all of those creations were non-living, non-breathing creatures. It wasn't until 1993, when Steven Spielberg created a visual masterpiece, that we actually had, living, breathing creatures. And those creatures, those dinosaurs, still hold up today. Jurassic Park took the idea of computer-generated imagery and, they amped it to 11. Watching dinosaurs walk across the silver screen and looking as real as any creature ever had, it was amazing. And we knew the industry would be changed forever. And it was. For a while, we started to witness a rise in computer-generated effects. 1996, we had Independence Day. I watched it a few months back, and those spaceships, they really work. Again, a lot of practical and miniature work, enhanced with computer-generated ships and things along those lines. It marries together nicely, and that makes it feel more authentic. 1997, Starship Troopers saw giant bugs and massive battles. It was stunning to watch soldiers go up against huge creatures that just sort of felt real. In 1999, The Matrix used quite a bit of digitally created imagery, and while some of it doesn't hold up as well as it did at the time, it still looked pretty damn impressive overall, and I would argue better than a number of films we're going to mention that are 25 years newer than it was. In 2002, Peter Jackson and Weta delivered to us Lord of the Rings, creating dozens of CG characters and immersive battle scenes. We were then taken to the world of Pandora in the film Avatar, and we watched in amazement in 2008 as Iron Man walked out of a cave and into cinema history. It was beginning to look like CGI would soon become almost unrecognizable from real life. And then everything changed. All right, so I suppose it isn't fair to say everything changed. There are still amazing effects in Hollywood, but while blockbuster films saw their budgets growing, the audience began to see a noticeable decline in quality of visual effects. Let me use a few modern films, and I mean recent films, just to give reference. Black Panther released in 2018 and made for a budget of $200 million. Yes, the story is great, and some of the effects are solid, but then we have that train fight sequence where Black Panther and Killmonger looked kind of like cartoon characters. If I were to compare this same shot to Legolas from Lord of the Rings climbing onto the elephant in 2003, I would have to say Legolas, while not perfect, actually looks better. Why? What happened? In a span of 15 years, one film having a budget of $94 million and the other $200 million, why are there still a few questionable scenes in the newer movie? How about another $200 million film, Wonder Woman 1984 from 2020? That fight scene with Cheetah is ridiculous. The Flash 2023, $220 million budget, and just too many poor effect scenes scattered from the opening sequence all the way through that climactic battle. Just too many to mention. Recently, we had Borderlands, a $150 million movie with effects so bad, I took to comparing them with the 1980 B movie Flash Gordon, which was made for about $130 million less. So what is the issue? Where are things falling short? Computers are definitely faster. We have better processors, stronger graphics, and visual effects artists have theoretically grown in skill. So where does the problem stem from? Well, for the most part, there's actually a very, very simple explanation. It isn't money. Well, not just money anyway, or not the way you're thinking about it. It's time. When these films are being produced, the studios are farming out the effect shots to various companies. The effects companies will bid on the work, and since they're competing with a number of other special effects houses, they will inevitably underbid to try and win the job. Yeah, I know, it sounds like it's money, but trust me, there's more to it. They have the job, right? But it comes with stipulations, and those stipulations are usually, you guessed it, time. The studio wants the effects fast, and they want them cheap. Now, back when I was in college, for audiovisual production, we had a saying, fast, good, cheap. You can have two, but never all three. Studios want these effects. They want them fast, and they want them cheap. That leaves good some of the time, if you get what I'm saying. Because of that, the visual effects artists are either not given the time or not given the funding needed to fully render the shots. Studio execs don't care if all the characters in Flash's time void look cartoony because historically, the film's going to make money. Or they were anyway. Effects artists are getting tired of catching the blame, and they're starting to speak out. And audiences are hitting their threshold as well. It is unacceptable that a film exists with a $150 or $200 or sometimes even $300 million budget, and the effects come out looking like something created on a Windows 95 machine. Again, I go back to Jurassic Park, a film with a $63 million budget where the special effects were treated as an important piece of the storytelling. That film went on to gross over $1 billion worldwide. Pair it with the more recent Jurassic World films, which by today's standards look decent, but stacked up against their 93 predecessor, to me, no comparison. 93 wins. Do the dinosaurs look worse? Not necessarily. But instead of placing CG into a real-world environment and taking the time to map it out and do the lighting correctly to match, the backgrounds and everything, they just drop everything into a CG background as well. Yeah, it's a little cheaper for the filmmakers, but at what expense? See what I'm saying here? It might seem cheaper, but is it really? That money is going somewhere, but it isn't going to the effects artist, because now they have more shots than ever to complete, but they're expected to deliver them on an even tighter deadline. I mentioned the recent Flash film. Well, a while back, one of the guys who worked on it, Zach Mulligan, spoke up about the effects in the movie. He's quoted as saying the following: "If you thought the Flash had bad CGI, I can tell you why, because I worked on the movie. If it looks like a visual effects shot in the Flash was made in a week, it's probably because it was. Every day was kind of a new challenge in that sense. You never knew what you were going to get when you walked in." Does it sound bad to you? Well, it's actually going to get a little worse, because the team who was working on it wasn't just working on one film. They were being tossed between three very effect-heavy movies: The Flash, Aquaman 2, and Black Adam. Mulligan continued by saying, sometimes you'd give an artist an asset or a shot for The Flash, and then the very next day, they're working on something for Aquaman, and then the next day, it's something for Black Adam. They have very little context for it. But we need them both done by the end of the week because we don't know when people are going to need it up the chain of command. So we're starting to hear that some of these guys are working 12-hour days without any overtime. And when there's a deadline, sometimes 6 to 7 days a week. Effect shots require time to render, and typically they need anywhere from 5 to 15 render passes to make them look right. But they're being stopped by the corporate boys and told, hey, that's good enough. For those who don't know, render passes are used to help capture specific information, in a CG scene. It's things like diffuse color, specular highlights, shadows, depth, motion blur, things like that. So when the artist isn't allowed to fully render a shot, it can cause it to look a little off, giving it an appearance that is sometimes unnatural, maybe too smooth or a little cartoony. That's why in certain films featuring living beings especially, we get what is known as the uncanny valley effect. That weird feeling we get when we see something that's supposed to be real but somehow looks a little off. Might even leave you feeling a bit unsettled. The Polar Express has been accused of this several times, but for something more in line with our discussion, I refer you to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Oh, and that troll scene, because it was weird. Here you go. And again, a lot of what we saw in the new Flash movie was, again, weird looking. Here you go. So with all of this being said, Hollywood big shots, look, maybe it's time we drop the budgets back down a few $1 million and return to the time when we understood that less money might have led to ingenuity. There was a time when filmmakers had to be creative, which led to some awesome movie magic moments. CG is a great tool. CG needs to enhance. It needs to be seamless. It needs to be, in the background where it's not noticed. Because when it's not noticed, that means they're doing something right. Let's stop trying to push movies out as fast as possible, and instead, let's give the visual effects artists, because they are artists, my friends, let's give them the time they need to create their opus. Hey guys, I'm Jason Emmett. This was the Movie Mix Deep Dive. Leave a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. Were special effects better in the 90s than they are today? If you haven't hit subscribe, hit subscribe. Until next time, stay awesome.